Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're exploring something pretty much everyone goes through: change. Big life changes.
Yeah, the major transitions. Sometimes they're exciting, sometimes, frankly, terrifying.
Exactly. And navigating them, well, it takes a lot psychologically, doesn't it? We're looking at the toolkit you need to manage all that uncertainty and, come out the other side okay.
It's so important. We've gathered insights from, well, clinical advice, some science on stress responses, even research on how moving house affects friendships.
Right. So our goal really is to give you a kind of practical guide to building resilience through all this.
Let's get started.
Okay, first up, what is a life transition? It's not just like one thing happening. It's more of a sharp break, right? With a beginning, maybe some turning points, and then an end.
Precisely. Think about moving cities or starting a completely new career path, maybe retiring after decades, those kinds of shifts.
And it helps to know what kind of change you're dealing with. I saw our sources categorize them pretty neatly.
They do. First, you've got your anticipated transitions. These are those you often see coming, graduating, maybe getting married. They tend to follow a sort of expected path.
Makes sense. Then the opposite.
Yeah, the unanticipated transitions. These hit you out of the blue. A sudden illness, losing your job unexpectedly, or, a huge global event like the pandemic we all went through. Jarring is the word.
Hmm. But then there are these sneakier ones, right? The ones you don't always notice.
Uh-huh. Like non-event transitions. This is when something you really expected to happen, like maybe having kids or hitting a certain career goal, just
Mhm.
doesn't. It's the absence of the expected.
Oof, that sounds tough. And the last one.
The sleeper transition. This one creeps up on you. It's gradual. You might not even realize it's happening until you look back. Maybe realizing a difficult relationship slowly ended, or even slowly mastering a new skill over time.
Okay, so knowing the type helps frame it. But you mentioned something earlier that surprised me, grief. Even with good changes.
Yes, absolutely. It often
Yeah.
catches people off guard. Even positive transitions, like finally moving into that dream house you work so hard for, they still involve grief.
Why? Why, if it's something you wanted? That feels counterintuitive.
Because grief, in this context, isn't just about sadness over loss. It's the whole emotional process of letting go of the familiar, the old reality.
Ah, okay, so you're losing something even if you're gaining something else.
Exactly. You're losing a version of yourself, maybe, or a structure you relied on. There are actually a few types of loss happening at
It's
once.
like losing your identity. Going from being a student to, I don't know, a full-time worker, or single to married.
Precisely. That's a big one. Loss of identity. Also, loss of routine.
Hmm.
Familiarity feels safe, right? When that's gone, it's unsettling.
And loss of relationships, obviously. Leaving colleagues, neighbors.
Yep. And then there's one that's particularly tricky. Ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss. What's that?
It's not about losing a person who's died.
Yeah.
It's grieving something less tangible, like the dreams you had for your life that didn't quite pan out, or maybe watching your kids grow up and leave home. It's a natural change, but you're grieving that past phase.
Wow. That sounds really confusing to deal with because there's nothing concrete to point to.
Exactly. You're grieving a potential future that isn't going to happen, or a past that slipped away. It's hard to mourn clearly.
And all this emotional stuff, it actually affects us physically, doesn't it? I saw the Integrated Care Clinic source mention the amygdala.
Right. Our brain's little alarm system. It sees new, unknown situations as potential threats. Losing that familiar routine basically puts your internal threat detector on high alert.
So that's where the anxiety comes from.
That's a big part of it. This uncertainty triggers our stress responses. The classic fight or flight, you feel anxious, maybe irritable, ready to lash out or run away.
Or freeze.
Or freeze, yeah. That feeling of being overwhelmed, shutting down, feeling numb or disconnected, just stuck.
And there's a fourth one too, right? Fawn.
Yes, the fawn response. It's less talked about sometimes. It's basically a survival strategy through appeasement, people pleasing.
How does that work?
Well, the thinking is, if you make yourself agreeable, helpful, completely non-threatening, maybe you can neutralize the threat that way. You see people sometimes jump into overdrive, being hyper-helpful or accommodating when they're under immense stress.
Interesting. So losing routines really destabilizes our nervous system because that predictability is gone.
It's a huge anchor. Routines help regulate us. Without them, we feel adrift, and the threat response kicks in hard.
Okay, so our system's flashing red alert. What can we actually do? This brings us to the coping toolkit, right?
Exactly. Coping strategies.
Mhm.
These are the things we do consciously or sometimes unconsciously to try and manage those really unpleasant emotions.
And there are different types of coping.
Yeah, the big foundational idea from researchers Folkman and Lazarus splits it into two main camps. First, you've got problem-focused coping.
Okay, problem focus. That sounds like fixing the problem.
Pretty much. It's aimed at changing the stressful situation itself, taking direct action. Like if you're moving, you research neighborhoods, you make packing lists, you hire movers, information seeking, planning, taking control.
Right, it gives you a sense of doing something, of mastery.
Exactly. Then the other type is emotion-focused coping.
And that's about managing the feelings.
Precisely. It's not about changing the external situation, maybe because you can't. It's about managing your emotional reaction to the situation. Things like distracting yourself, practicing mindfulness, trying to find a positive angle, or leaning on friends for support.
Okay, so you need both problem focused and emotion focused.
Generally, yes. The key is knowing when each is most helpful. If you can change the situation, like finding a new job after a layoff, problem-focused strategies are usually the go-to.
But if it's something you can't control, like maybe a chronic illness or bereavement,
Then emotion-focused strategies become crucial. Acceptance, processing the feelings, finding ways to soothe yourself, trying to just fix an unfixable situation with problem-focused coping can actually make things worse.
that makes sense. And one thing that really jumped out at me from the sources was about certainty, how demanding certainty is actually a problem itself.
Oh, definitely. Anxiety just loves uncertainty, feeds on it. A really powerful way to dial down anxiety is accepting that you can't control everything. You
Yeah.
take reasonable precautions, you do what you can, and that has to be enough.
And there was a CBT technique mentioned, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right. A core one for anxiety. Instead of letting your mind spiral into the absolute worst case scenario, which it loves to do,
Guilty.
yeah, most of us are. Instead, you actively think about the most likely scenario, what would probably happen. It's almost always somewhere much more manageable, between the absolute best and the absolute worst.
So that's like using a problem-focused approach on your own emotional reaction.
Kind of, yeah. You're actively intervening in that catastrophic thinking pattern.
Okay, let's get practical. What are some concrete adaptive strategies psychologists recommend?
Well, there are quite a few, and it's useful to know why they work. Take journaling. People suggest it all the time, right?
Yeah, write down your feelings.
But the reason it works is fascinating. It literally gets the swirling thoughts out of your head and onto paper. It helps you process, moves the thinking from the emotional part of your brain to the more logical part, the prefrontal cortex. It can reduce anxiety and help you reframe negative thoughts.
Okay, that's cool. What about mindfulness? Breathing exercises, that kind of thing. Box breathing was mentioned.
Yeah, those work directly on your physiology. Slow, intentional breathing actually calms your nervous system down. It tells your amygdala, that alarm center, okay, the immediate danger has passed. It helps switch off that fight or flight response.
So simple but effective. What else?
Well, obviously, therapy is huge. Getting an outside professional perspective can be invaluable. And exploring a new hobby.
A hobby. How does that help with, say, grief over a job loss?
It helps in a few ways. Engaging in something creative or absorbing forces your mind into a state of flow, which is a great temporary escape from stress.
Yeah.
Plus, it can help rebuild that sense of identity that might have been lost. You're not just unemployed, you're also a painter or learning guitar.
Ah, I see. Building something new.
Exactly. And then there are the basics, which we sometimes forget when we're stressed. Building a strong support system, really leaning on people. Improving sleep hygiene, vital for emotional regulation. Healthy eating habits.
And just simple self-care, right? Making sure you shower, maybe putting on music and having a quick dance party in the kitchen. Sounds silly, but
Not silly at all. Those small acts restore a sense of normalcy and predictability when everything else feels up in the air. They matter.
okay, so those are good strategies. But we also need to talk about the flip side, the maladaptive coping.
Right. Or non-coping, really. These are the things that might feel like they're helping in the short term, give you a quick hit of relief.
Like avoidance. Just not thinking about the stressful thing. Sometimes that feels necessary.
It feels necessary. And that temporary relief is exactly why these strategies are so seductive. But the research is really clear. Things like avoidance, denial, relying on substance use, blaming yourself for everything, procrastination. They all correlate with lower resilience in the long run.
Why? How do they make it worse?
because they don't actually deal with the stressor. They just push it down or sideways.
Yeah.
The underlying problem is still there, often getting bigger, and you're avoiding the necessary problem-focused or emotion-focused work needed to actually adapt. You're digging the hole deeper, essentially.
Okay, so putting it all together, resilience isn't about just toughing it out.
Not at all. True resilience seems to come from that flexible combination, using problem-focused strategies to gain control where you can, using emotion-focused strategies to find balance and acceptance when you can't, and crucially, doing both adaptively, so you don't slide into those maladaptive habits like avoidance.
That makes sense. It's about having the right tool for the job and actually using it.
Couldn't have said it better.
So we've talked a lot about the internal stuff, the psychology, but transitions don't happen in a vacuum, right? What about the social side, support networks?
Absolutely crucial. We are fundamentally social creatures. Going through big changes alone is incredibly difficult. A solid support network, family, friends, maybe professionals, even online groups, is vital for buffering stress and reducing that awful feeling of isolation.
And it's not just about receiving support, is it? It has to be mutual.
Ideally, yes. Healthy support networks involve give and take, and also, importantly, setting boundaries within that network is key. Otherwise, the network itself can become another source of stress if the dynamics aren't healthy.
Okay, let's zoom in on one specific transition. Relocation. Moving house, especially later in life. There was some really interesting research on this.
Yes, from the Health and Retirement Study, they look at older adults aged 50 plus who moved. They used a couple of theories, the social convoy model and socio-emotional selectivity theory.
Which basically suggests,
Basically, as people age or face big changes like moving, they tend to prioritize relationships that are emotionally meaningful and often require less effort to maintain, which usually means family gets prioritized over friends, especially friends who now live far away.
okay. And the study looks specifically at how moving distance affected contact with friends, using different ways of keeping in touch.
Exactly. They looked at three modes: in-person contact, phone calls, and written contact, mainly email in this study.
And what did they find for in-person contact? I imagine that takes the biggest hit.
Unsurprisingly, yes. It was the most sensitive to distance. Even moving a moderate distance, like 5 to 50 miles, significantly cut down how often people saw their friends face-to-face. Moving further, over 50 miles, reduced it even more. It just highlights the practical challenge.
Makes sense. What about phone calls?
This was interesting. Telephone contact frequency only really dropped significantly when people moved long distance, 50 miles or more.
Huh. Why only long distance?
The researchers theorized it's likely because phone calls need you both to be available at the same time they're synchronous, and often phone calls are used to arrange meeting up in person. So if meeting up becomes practically impossible due to distance, the frequency of those coordinating calls might naturally decrease.
Okay, that logic follows. But the really surprising finding was about email, right?
This was fascinating. Written or email contact frequency was essentially not affected by distance at all.
Wow. Seriously. So people kept emailing their friends just as often, whether they moved down the street or across the country?
That's what the data showed for this group. The asynchronous nature of email, you send it when you can. They read it when they can seem to overcome the geographical barrier entirely, at least in terms of frequency of contact.
That's incredible. It suggests that email, or maybe asynchronous communication generally, helps maintain the cognitive connection, the feeling of being in touch, even when the logistics of synchronous calls or visits become difficult.
Precisely. It bypasses the need to coordinate schedules or be in the same place, making it a surprisingly prevalent tool for keeping those friendship ties active over distance.
So quite a journey we've taken. We started with understanding transition as a form of grief, even the good changes.
Looked at how our nervous system reacts, that whole threat response.
Dived into the coping toolkit, problem-focused versus emotion-focused, and the dangers of maladaptive coping.
And ended up looking at how even something as simple as email can help us maintain friendships when we're far apart, especially later in life.
Yeah. So the big takeaway seems to be about adaptability, right? Using the right strategies for the situation.
Definitely. Successful coping seems to be about that blend. Taking control where possible, managing emotions effectively, and crucially, doing it all adaptively without falling back on avoidance.
And actively building and maintaining those support networks. Can't do it alone.
Absolutely, that social connection is fundamental.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. This study on relocation showed email contact stayed strong despite distance, but the researchers noted older adults still really prefer face-to-face time. And things like practical help, instrumental support, usually need you to be physically close.
Right, and the study used older tech phone and email. They themselves suggested future studies should look at newer things, like video calls.
So here's the question to mull over. Given that phone calls seem to drop off partly because arranging synchronous time is hard over distance, and knowing people crave that visual connection and maybe even cues for practical support, how can we maybe better use synchronous visual tech like video calls to bridge that gap? How can we make it feel more intimate, more supportive, closer to being there when physical distance is unavoidable?
Yeah, how do we leverage that technology not just for contact frequency, but for maintaining the real depth and support of friendship across the miles? Something to think about.